Good afternoon, colleagues. Good afternoon to our facilitator, Dr. Lorenzo David. Dr. David, can you hear me?
Hi, Mr. Nkosi. Yes, I can hear you clearly.
Okay, thank you so much for confirming that. Thank you once again, colleagues, for joining us in this afternoon workshop titled An Introduction to Navigating the Challenges of Research Supervision. As I've mentioned earlier, my name is Kosietu Ntuli. I'm from the Research Capacity Development Unit at the Postgraduate School. I'll be your moderator for today's session. Before we can move on, I would like to let you aware that this workshop is recorded. We keep the record of all our workshop and we share the recording with all our participants via our digital platforms, which is the model communities, which includes the supervisor community, as well as the PDRF model community. And we also share the recording of the workshop as well as the resources, which includes the presentation slides on our RCT management system. So that is the reason why we record all our workshop. Thank you once again for attending. I would like to go through some housekeeping rules. Please feel free to use the chat to ask questions or raise your hand to engage in discussion. We encourage an interactive and collaborative environment, so don't hesitate to share your thoughts or experiences. I will enable all your mics. Please, colleagues, do make sure that there is no background noise from your side. If you do have a question, just raise a hand, or alternatively, just type under the chat and I will notify Dr. David that someone has a question. If you do have any contribution, you can just raise a hand and unmute your mic and ask your question or make your contribution. I'll be also sharing a feedback form under the chat. We kindly request you to take your 2 minutes or 3 minutes to fill that feedback in. It helps us in terms of improving our service delivery, as well as to give feedback to our facilitators for their efforts they are taking in preparation this kind of workshop. With that being said, colleagues, allow me now to introduce our facilitator, Dr. Lorenzo David. We are honored to have you as our facilitator for today. Dr. Lorenzo is currently a coordinator at the Research Capacity Development Unit, Postgraduate School, University of Johannesburg. Dr. Lorenzo was recently awarded a PhD in biochemistry for his assessment of transferring tech gold, palladium, and gold palladium bimetallic nanoparticles and their potential for anti-cancer drug delivery at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. By adapting a holistic approach to education, Dr. Lorenzo hopes to inspire students to achieve personal and academic success with a hands-on and learner-centric approach to value-based learning. Thank you once again, Dr. Lorenzo, for honoring our invite in facilitating today's workshop. We're looking forward to a productive and insightful presentation. Before I hand over to Dr. Lorenzo, just a quick announcement or quick reminder. Colleagues, I will be sending out certificates for the month of May for those colleagues who have been attending or who have attended any of the workshops within the month of May. I'll be sending out attendance certificates. I haven't started yet, but the certificate should be out by end of this week. So we encourage you, colleagues, to make sure that you register for all the workshops or for each workshop that you are interested in, so that we can capture your details correctly to avoid misspelling of your name or forgetting to insert your title, or also to forget maybe your staff or student number. So we kindly request you, colleagues, to make sure that you register so that we get your correct details. With that being said, thank you once again, colleagues, for taking your time, and thank you to our facilitator. I now hand over to Dr. Lorenzo David. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nkosi, and welcome everyone. I hope that you all are well. I just want to turn my camera on for a few seconds just so you can put a face to the person who's going to be presenting. So with that, I'm just going to share my slides. And Kosi, can you please just let me know once you're able to see my screen and if it goes onto presenter mode?
Yes, Doc, I can see your screen and it's now on presenter mode.
Okay,
Thank you.
perfect. Thank you. Okay, so once again, colleagues, welcome to today's session, which is titled An Introduction to Navigating the Challenges of Research Supervision. We're very excited to have you join us today, and we hope that it's going to be an engaging session with the audience. I see there's some members of the audience who would have a lot more experience, a lot of experience, and I'm sure we all can learn from one another as well. So as the title states, this is going to be an introduction, and we try to cover some of the key areas we've identified in terms of research supervision. Now, this is based a lot on my experience, as well as some readings that we've done, as well as some interactions with members, with supervisors over the course of the past few years. So without further ado, I think we can move on to the session objectives. So for today's session, we'd like to cover a few key aspects. The first of which is going to be understand some of the key supervision challenges within the South African context. We thereafter will move on to exploring some practical supervision strategies as well as techniques. How do we deal with everything ranging from, maybe a difficult student or issues of communication? How do we tailor our feedback so that there's maximum retention from the student and understanding? We thereafter move on to, I'd just like to bring to our attention the Council on Higher Education's doctoral graduate attributes. And I think this is more of something I just wanted to add for our own information so that when we are, continuing and when we are in a position that we are supervising students, especially PhD students, we can have an idea of this document and obviously try our best to ensure that these attributes are actually being instilled in the student. And lastly, I'm just going to quickly go through highlighting two models which actually support the process of supervision. Now, often, as I'll speak for myself as an emerging academic and obviously as a young supervisor, often when we're placed in this situation, we feel as if there's so many different aspects for us to consider. And the reason why I wanted to add this model in is just to show us that, there are some guidelines out there in terms of how can we get through this process successfully. Now, this is obviously in addition to speaking to senior members within our faculties or our departments, speaking to our peers, speaking to our previous supervisors, and also at the same time learning from some of our own experiences from a student and obviously being able to mold that in and improving certain areas so that we can improve and be better for the students who are placed under our supervision. So I'd like to start off with a reflection activity. And I think the point of this is I don't really expect anyone to, if you'd like to, you're more than welcome to unmute your mic and share. But I just like this to be a point where we maybe reflect on what are some of our biggest hopes or concerns about supervising postgraduate research and postgraduate students in particular. So, throughout the course of this presentation, maybe you can keep this in the back of your mind and we'll return to these in our final reflection and the end in terms of the question and answer session. So with that, please feel free to also pop your ideas down in the chat. Some issues that actually pop to mind for me would be that, some of us may feel anxious about guiding originality, especially when it comes to a PhD study. We've been placed, a student's been placed under our care, and now we have to guide them in terms of doing the right thing for their PhD study. Or, you could be unsure about how much to intervene, and this is something that I am especially guilty of when I'm dealing with my students. As much as possible, we want to always help them, but sometimes we have to reflect, is this actually the best outcome for the student? Are we enabling them to grow independence, become independent researchers, become independent thinkers? So these are some common challenges that we hope to address in today's session. And once again, please, I do see there's quite a few of us in attendance. So if there's any thoughts that you'd like to share, or maybe some input, even from your own experience, it'll be greatly appreciated because I think that together will just add to this presentation and make this more beneficial to many of us who are here today. So as you can see from the slide on the screen, I've actually split this presentation into two parts because I feel when it comes to research supervision, and the challenges that we face, often it is very easy for us to automatically focus on the students, maybe issues that we have in the students or getting them to complete the work or submit on time. But I think there's another part of academic supervision that may not be spoken about as much. And this, we've actually labeled it, structural and academic supervision challenges. What goes on behind the scenes in terms of your time management, your administrative duties, balancing all of these different responsibilities that have been placed on you. So I thought to make it a bit more holistic that we should actually speak about both of these parts and hopefully bring them together on how we can come up with, our own individualized plan for effectively supervising postgraduate students in research. So one of the first points that I'd like to discuss is time constraints. Now, we've been doing these workshops well, the RCD unit has been doing these workshops for a very long time, but since I joined, I've noticed a common theme in terms of time constraints in relation to supervision, and obviously in terms of academics. So we understand that as an academic, we have competing demands, and this is especially true for an academic supervisor. Now, these demands can include everything from if we're teaching a class, all of the administrative duty, which can be quite intensive, as well as balancing our own research so that we're remaining relevant within our fields, that we're publishing papers, that we're meeting our targets that have been set for us. So being able to effectively balance these responsibilities and being able to efficiently spread out time is something that, will come with practice. Many of us, it will take us probably a very long time to find balance here, but I feel that when it comes to these sorts of issues, there's no need for us to reinvent the wheel. We have very senior members present in staff, in our faculties, in our departments. And something that I always say is that I feel that it would be a disservice if I don't at least reach out and ask for advice. So when it comes to how do we go about balancing this, especially from the point of the emerging academic, I feel that we have to rely and on the experience of some of our peers, and even if it's just a quick chat, I'm sure that from everyone that I've come into contact with UJ, everyone's always been very willing to help. We understand that globally, supervision is not always recognized in workload allocations, and therefore we need to ensure that the way in which we distribute our time is going to be, allow us to achieve our goals. We understand that time is always scarce. It's one of the rarest commodities out there. So in that regard, we have to actually come up with a structure in terms of how we spend it. So, there was a good example, I think, from a presentation that was done towards the beginning of the year, where they explained that time is, if you think about it in the concept of, money being deposited into your bank every day. So you get a certain number of hours or a certain number of minutes being deposited into your account, and the way in which you spend it, is going to dictate what the outcome is going to be. So we get a new deposit every day, and obviously we aren't able to carry it forward to the next day. So in that regard, if we look at our time in terms of a budget, how do we go about effectively managing this? Well, some tools and techniques that I found to be quite useful would be firstly to block supervision into your calendar. Now, I know even from when I was being supervised, my previous supervisor, it was an open door policy, which is absolutely fantastic. But when we have these competing demands, I think it's also good, in addition to that, for us to have dedicated time in terms of which, dealing with students within our research group. This can range from everything from scheduling recurring meetings or even just having a quick chat in the morning to kind of find out the progress. Because what we've noticed is that with students, if there is a lack of content for an extended period of time, sometimes students may not continue at the pace that is required. So I think in that regard, being in constant contact and being able to lay out our time and making the students aware of it, we are able to be a bit more efficient, in my opinion. So in terms of time constraints, we also understand that when we have students who may have irregular process, they may work very hard for a month or two and we may not see them for 2 to 3 months. This ends up leading to additional time and effort being needed to complete the study and limit and obviously submit the thesis. And then obviously we all know about the last minute student demands. I think, for myself personally, I've been on both sides of this in terms of, when we have these last minute demands, we often as a student don't think about the pressure we're putting on our supervisor. And from the supervisor's position, they have so many things going on as well that obviously the pressure will actually intensify. And this is especially true during our submission or if we are making an application for funding or a bursary, etc. So with regards to time, I think it's important for us to be aware of, as we step into these roles, for us to be completely aware of what is required of us in terms of our teaching, in terms of our supervision, in terms of our research, in terms of our administration. And once we have an idea of, what is required, then we can actually come up with an efficient plan in order to maximize the time that we have. We understand that as academics, and for academics, the administrative load can be quite intense. And this can involve everything from paperwork, tracking the progress of your students, and obviously ensuring that there's compliance with institutional policies. Admin can often become an invisible labor, so to deal with this, I think that for us to have sort of a checklist, would actually be very beneficial. I'm sure many of us use this. So there is a document that I will share at the end of the presentation, and it's essentially UJ's supervisor checklist. And I found this to be, just reading through it, I think that this is actually an essential tool which will assist us in terms of, are we meeting each and every one of the requirements? Are we on track? What will be required for each of the processes? And it is quite an extensive document as well. So we will share the link to that at the end of the session. And when it comes to obviously this administrative load as well, we understand there's lots of forms and paperwork that is required for every student, be it from their proposal all the way up to their submission. So in this regard, I think it's always important for us to document our interactions. And this is also important for us to protect both ourselves as well as the student. Something that I will not touch on too much, but we do understand that be it from postgraduate or even when we are supervising, access to funding is often limited and it is highly competitive. So when students are applying for bursaries or scholarship, they are often unaware of the timelines and the criteria. And what ends up happening is obviously all of this is pushed to a very short period of time closer to the deadline, and pressure is placed on the supervisor, be it to review the funding applications or to double check the proposals. And if you have multiple students, this can put immense pressure on you as a supervisor. So some of the trends that we are identifying here can actually be easily avoided if we set the tone at the beginning of our interactions with our students as well. And I think we would have seen this being done for years already. When you go into a new supervisor, some supervisors will sit you down and they'll be like, this is what I expect of you. This is how often I expect to see the work. And I think by laying this out at the beginning of our interactions with the students, we actually able to make them aware of what is expected. And therefore, what are the consequences in terms of, submission deadlines, us missing the deadline, you not being able to register, etc. So everything can be done ahead of time. So in terms of research funding gaps, when students, and this has happened where they miss their deadlines, be it for NRF, let's just say NRF bursary or scholarship, what happens is that the pressure thereafter falls on the supervisor, to find or subsidize their resources as well. So in this regard, I think it's important for us to, lean on once again the experience that the institution has. So when it comes to funding, partner with our faculty's research office to identify, either something like small seed grants, or for lab-based students, we can always help them to align their research with funded projects as well. Excuse me. So when it comes to this aspect, I know that this is something that can actually cause quite a bit of issues and quite a bit of delays. Often when we have a student that's coming in the first month or two, when you starting a new project, there is that level of excitement. And what we notice is that as it progresses throughout the project, as the workload increases, the student ends up, after a while, it does start to take its toll. We notice that there are some delays that start to form. So one of the major delays that we've actually identified would be in the writing process as well as in the experimental process. And for this, I'm going to speak a lot more from my own experience. So we understand that students are often unfamiliar with disciplinary writing conventions, be it academic tone, coherence, structure, etc. And this is something that, a student may sit for a week or two, and they may generally be doing work, but if they don't know the direction in which they're going, it's not going to be time that is efficiently or that's time that is spent well. So to combat this, once again, in our meetings that we have with our students, I think it's good for us either to point them towards resources that will explain to them exactly what is required, not only in terms of academic writing, but and writing within a particular discipline, but also in terms of your specific research group. What not the writing style, but the results. How do you present the results? What type of papers do you target? Just so that they are aware of what is actually expected of them. So how do we go about, training students in terms of the writing and giving them more exposure to the writing process? I think it's important for us to suggest or build, a structured writing schedule. Now, generally they are, if I can broadly group students as two types of students, you know, the first one would be the student who, sticks to their own deadlines and will write religiously, and then you have some students who may be fantastic at experimental work or collecting the data, but when it comes to actually writing, they always push it to the end. And what happens is that actually puts pressure not only on the student but also yourself as a supervisor, because now you may have multiple chapters and multiple theses from different students to go through. So to combat this, I think it's important for us to build a structured writing schedule. So this can vary anywhere. I've seen, supervisors have weekly deadlines in terms of, your progress reports and your writing report. What have you done within this past week, all the way up to monthly deadlines or even every quarter. you know Outlining, requesting students to outline their chapters even at the beginning stages of their study, and providing them with a thesis template. I think it's also important, and something we've learned from the writing consultations and interacting with students, is that students learn, yes, from us speaking to them, us guiding them, but they also need examples of good writing. So by us being able to provide them, maybe this is a particular paper that is very good that relates to their study. By providing them with these examples, they can actually refer to it throughout their writing process. They may not have access to us 24/7, but they definitely have access to a paper online 24/7, especially if it's been downloaded or printed for them. So in that regard, if we're providing, we're actually saving ourselves a lot of effort as we're moving later on as well. Something that we've noticed as well is inconsistent progress, either on your thesis or your experimental work. Now, students sometimes will go through, highs and lows in terms of the effort that they're putting in, and this could be due to several reasons. It could be varying everything from an experiment not working out to maybe some other issues that they have going on in their personal lives as well. So just to guide them through this, I think, us being in constant contact and actually expecting these updates actually alerts to the students the importance that, when a student joins for PhD or a student joins for master's, they think they have 2 to 3 years to complete this project. This is actually more than enough time. It's too much time for me. Actually can do everything in a short period of time. And what do? They end up taking days off. They end up taking sometimes weeks off, and then the pressure starts to build when experiments don't work, and obviously projects have to be adapted, etc. So in that regard, I think it's good for us to have these sorts of communication with our students and encourage them to use, well, I've used the term lab books here just because of my background, but lab books or notebooks, shared folders to track progress as well as to discuss data. The more often, and obviously as the time permitting, we are able to interact with our students and just have even a quick 5-minute chat to find out, what exactly is going on. Are there any issues that you're facing? Instead of the student waiting 2 to 3 weeks trying to solve the issue on their own, we actually can save them the time by, maybe a 15-20 minute chat as well. And then now we're going to move on to part two. So before I move on, if there are any questions or contributions, please feel free to either pop it in the chat or unmute your mic. I think Mr. Nkosi will actually be monitoring. So while we wait for any chat, I think we'll move on to part two. So this is the aspect that is often spoken about in terms of our interpersonal supervision challenges, interactions with the students, and there could be so many different factors that actually lead into this. And hopefully the next few slides will be able to provide a bit more insight into how we can combat this. So I think when it comes to, this section of dealing with students, the key point that actually stands out to me would be communication and fostering effective communication. If we look back to maybe some of the supervisors that we've had previously, maybe there is a possibility that there was differences in the way that we communicate or wish to be communicated in, and we see this is becoming more and more apparent, in the current generation as well. So when it comes to these issues regarding communication, it often stems from assumptions, which leads to misalignments. Um, and this can vary from everything from some mismatched expectations on, from the student, how available is my supervisor, or from the supervisor, how much of progress is my student expected to make within a given period of time. So, as with any form of communication, I think it's very important for us to address it at the start. So, if we identify, maybe some early warning signs in terms of, student progress, or the way in which the student is interacting, or you can sense something is not right, I think it's important for us to maybe just engage with the student in a respectful way and just to find out what's going on, because sometimes, these quick chats can actually create a much better environment where the student will be able to feel free to work much better and obviously progress through their project much easier as well. So when it comes to issues surrounding communication, and I think on the next slide we're going to speak about some generational differences. I think to combat some of these problems, these are some key points that we've identified. The first one is going to be to establish clear expectations. Now, at first, when we meet our students and we're discussing the potential project with them, everyone is excited to work on this project and to start moving on, but I think it's important for us to take a few minutes to establish what are your expectations for the student. How often do you expect them? Now this will obviously be area specific, but how often do you expect them to be in the lab, as an example? How often will they provide you with updates? Be it weekly or monthly? How often do you guys expect to have these catch-ups? The next one would be adapt to different communication styles. And we can understand, and if we speak to previous generations to the current generation, we'll understand that our method of communication actually adapts. So when we are dealing with students, we need to be ensured that we are adapting to their, communicating in a way that they completely understand, and that they understand that there's no, obviously, malintent behind it, especially when we're providing feedback as well. Something which is important for us as supervisors will be active listening. So when our student comes to us, with a problem, be it in the lab or with their writing process, I think it's important for us to listen to what they're saying. And active listening involves.
Apologies for
Yeah,
that,
no,
Doc.
no problem. No
It
problem.
was one of the participants.
Okay. When it comes to active listening, essentially we listen completely to what they say. We don't listen to respond. We try to understand their point of view, and therefore we can come up with constructive solutions to the issues that they're having as well. I feel personally that it's very important for us to encourage open dialogue with our students. They should feel free to be able to come to us with any issues, especially relating to their study. And obviously, it's going to save time. And the last point would be to foster empathy and mutual respect within our research group, because no one wants to work in an environment where it feels a bit more oppressive or restrictive as well. So in previous workshops, it was suggested that, or it actually is a supervision agreement which will be signed between the student and the supervisor. So in this agreement, you can cover everything from feedback frequency to what's the best method of communication. Do you prefer emails? Do you prefer, a Teams call? Do you prefer to come in person? And I think the important thing here is also in terms of our boundaries that we're going to have with the students as well. And it's important for us to check in on this regularly, as we do understand that the dynamics between a student and a supervisor actually continue to evolve over time, and obviously as the project progresses as well. So this is just something I thought was quite interesting to put up here. I'm not going to spend too much of time on it, but we can see there's four distinct generations, you know, uh, that we will be often dealing with. I think in a university setting. So they range everywhere from the baby boomers to Generation X to millennials, and obviously the current generation, which is Generation Z. And I think, these generational differences actually shape the way people work, the way we communicate, the way we manage our time. And being able to understand these differences helps us to create a more harmonious working environment. So to quickly go through it, and these are generalizations that have been, they are in the literature, but just to kind of summarize them quickly, in terms of baby boomers, they are known for their strong work ethic and value for job security. They tend to prefer face-to-face communication and formal structured settings. And they often, the challenge for communication with them will be baby boomers may struggle with, and this is a generalization as well, they may struggle with digital communication tools and might prefer traditional methods. And this can range everything from phone calls or emails over instant messaging. So if we take a comparison, you have a supervisor who is a baby boomer and they are supervising a student who is, let's just say, either a millennial or Generation Z, shall we say. So, what are some of the challenges that we can identify? So, if we look at the present generation, they are extremely tech savvy. They are highly connected and they prefer immediate feedback, and often engaging. They're always involved in communication, obviously. So they are more focused as a generalization, once again, on mental health. The work-life balance is very important, as well as initiatives including diversity and inclusion. So one of the challenges for communication is Generation Z may actually value clear boundaries between personal and professional lives, which could clash with supervisors who work long hours or have unclear work-life balance practices. So the point of us actually discussing this slide would be, often when we are supervising and when we'll be supervising into the future, we often will be interacting with different generations. And the way in which we communicate, the way in which we believe things to be done, it's what we are comfortable with. But I think when we step into the space of being a supervisor, there needs to be a part of us that is open and amenable to actually adapting to our students. And I'm not saying we change our supervision style, but I think in terms of accommodation and being able to effectively communicate with them. This slide basically highlights the fact that there are differences and preferences between each of the generations and how we prefer to communicate with one another. And us being able to understand the requirements of each individual generation, and even within that, each individual will help us to actually, produce a better relationship between our students. And obviously, these sorts of relationships, good relationships, often lead to students feeling more comfortable, and ultimately, we hope that it leads to a higher quality output in terms of their thesis submission. So another aspect or challenge in supervision would be, how exactly do we give feedback? Now, once again, this leads into what we've discussed previously in terms of communication. Um, when I received feedback from my supervisor, it was very clear, concise, and direct. So, I would have, you know, red writing written all over my script, or even in track changes. And sometimes be questions. They'll be like, why unclear, rewrite, improve clarity, etc. But what we're noticing, and this is from even some workshops and some conferences that we've attended, is that the way in which we're giving feedback is actually evolving. And when we break this here down, we can see that unclear or delayed feedback often discourages students. At some institutions and institutions across South Africa, there can sometimes be months between the students actually submitting a chapter and then getting some feedback back. And that can cause some certain emotions within our students. And also at the same time, we look at it from the point of a supervisor. If students are, you requesting a particular chapter and they are not providing you the material, that can make us feel a certain way as well. I think the way in which we are actually giving the feedback, we cannot be overly critical, in my opinion, because an overly critical tone can easily affect the confidence of the student. And this, I think, is especially true when, if we look at an honors student or even a master's student who's coming in or performing research for the first time. So the way in which we speaking to them, yes, feedback needs to actually guide the student in areas to improve, but it should not only highlight what they've done wrong. I believe you should also, highlight a few points, at least what they're doing right. At least they have a reference point in terms of their writing, what areas, they are working on and which areas are actually working correctly. So when we are providing feedback to our students, we believe it's important for us to be specific as well as constructive. So if you have read a particular paragraph and you see the clarity, conciseness, academic tone is it's not where it needs to be, don't just say improve clarity, tone, and academic or coherence. Maybe highlight a particular sentence and give an example. Provide an example, even if it's just once, and the student can use it as a reference point in terms of, okay, this is what I have done, and this is what I actually need to do differently. I think our feedback always needs to be constructive, and this is something that I see in a lot of the feedback from, staff members at UJ. We need to be guiding the students on how to improve because we want to obviously improve their skill set. We want the next draft to be better than the draft that is, that's has currently been submitted. I think it's important for us to also focus on the work and not the person. When it comes to feedback, we need to be unbiased. So we need to balance praise with actionable suggestions. I mean, at the end of the day, the students are coming to us for guidance on how they can, maybe move on to the next level in terms of their writing or their research, etc. So a good balance is always suggested. It's also important for us to use questions, or it's suggested, to encourage reflection. Instead of saying, this is wrong, we can pose it in the question, have you considered? Because when we do this, we get the student to think critically about their own work, which is something which is not always done, especially in the early stages of developing a draft. And if we look at feedback in this way, if we are receiving feedback from a student, for example, if you're having a particular meeting, I think it's important for us to listen openly, to ask any clarifying question and not to take criticism personally. At the end of the day, feedback helps us to improve. And even as a supervisor who has been, a student's been placed under your guidance, it is my personal opinion, it may not be the opinion of everyone else, but I feel that we can always learn from one another. There's certain things that students come to us sometimes with, maybe a new app or a new technology or a new program for analysis that you actually like, wow, this is actually going to be great. So we can always learn from one another as well. And the last point would be feedback as a dialogue. Um, I think it's important for us to aim for a two-way discussion to support your independent or the independent thinking of the student as well. So this is something, obviously, is another aspect that many of us may have some experience with, and this would be engaging with disinterested students, or I should have put the disinterested in inverted commas. The reason for this is that, okay, how do we identify this firstly? So, the student may not often come into the lab or to our particular office, there'll be vague communication. So you'll ask them, when can I have this chapter? And they'll say, I'm actually been working on it. I'll try and send it to you as soon as possible, or I'm almost done, or there may be a perceived lack of enthusiasm when we're speaking to the students as well. Now, at first glance, this may seem as if the student is disinterested. And you know what, there may be cases where the student genuinely may not be interested in the project anymore. However, I think as supervisors, we also need to ask certain questions. Is this actually masking any mental health issues in terms of, are they burnt out? Are they extremely tired? Are there some personal issues going on? Are there feelings of imposter syndrome? And whilst we still have to stay within the boundaries of that relationship of a supervisor and a student, I think that as a supervisor, the onus is also upon us to ensure that our students are actually coping and managing with their particular projects as well. So, how do we go about engaging with so-called disinterested students? I think always when we have these sorts of issues that's arising, the first thing to do is, meet up with the student, even if it's just a quick 15 minutes Teams call. Set up a meeting and just find out how they're doing. I know it can be a bit difficult sometimes in terms of time, but at the end of the day, this is a student under our guidance as well. Once we try to unpack what exactly is going on, maybe they're feeling overwhelmed, maybe they feel that, nothing is working out, and they're becoming, there's no motivation for it, or they feel like it's not possible. So once we understand what exactly the problem is, we can work with the student, partner with the student to actually address these issues as well. And more often than not, we actually will understand that once we engage with the student in such a way, they feel supported, therefore their confidence starts to come back, and thereafter they can continue with their project as well. Instead of just us pushing it under the rug and leaving it, they will come right eventually. We can save time, we can save the student from going through a lot of hassle. At the end of the day, we're also going to save ourselves because obviously work is going to meet the deadlines. When it comes to these sorts of scenarios, if we have obviously more senior members in our research groups as well, we can always partner the students with them in terms of, if they're having any difficulties, if our time is very limited, and obviously if anything goes above and beyond that, then it can be brought to our attention as well. So, something that is often not spoken about, and I myself as a student was not aware of this. I mean, coming from master's into my PhD, I assumed that everything would just go exactly as it is. I mean, like at the time, I thought, no, a PhD is just, an extension of your master's. It's just a bit more work. But what we don't understand and what students don't understand is that, there's in your PhD journey specifically, there'll be ups and downs. There'll be challenges. There'll be, sometimes experiments won't work for months at a time. And being able to effectively deal with that and understand that it's only part of the process, if we can bring awareness to the students in this regard, we are only going to assist them in getting through their degree successfully while avoiding as much of the unnecessary stress as possible. In this regard as well, if we know that a student may be going through something, be it a personal issue or something within their family, we can actually encourage use of UJ Center, so PsycAD, which will be Center for Psychological Services, and they would be best placed to assist the student with various aspects, on how to get back to their best. Some other issues that we've identified in terms of supervision will be student time management. Um, Often, poor planning by the student leads to panic or last-minute submissions, and these, while they sometimes may meet the deadlines, the quality may not necessarily be there. And as we've discussed previously, inconsistent productivity cycles, they will appear in the lab for, a couple of weeks and they disappear and they appear. And then, sometimes it's very difficult to conduct research like this. So how do we go about managing a student's time or showing them how to manage their time? I think, the traditional approach of you have to, prescribe it, you have to be here at a certain time, you have to leave at a certain time. It may work in many cases, but it does not work in all the cases. I think if we, are able to have these discussions and lay out a plan in terms of our work, when our deadlines are, then and stress the importance of us meeting the deadlines and the implications if we don't meet these deadlines. By bringing this sort of awareness to the student, we actually are putting the responsibility back on them. And by doing that, they will actually understand what are the repercussions. And more often than not, from my experience, I see the students will actually adhere to those timelines as well. When it comes to student time management, we can actually refer them to certain tools. One that I've used and we've used at the RCD unit is actually Trello, and it is a good tool in terms of even if you have multiple students, if you want to track the progress of each of the projects as well. So by the click of a button, you can actually see where each student is. We can ask them to obviously update on a weekly basis. And if we notice that there's any delays in terms of student progress, we can address it quite early. And obviously, not too much of time is being wasted as well. I think, depending on our supervision style, encouraging things like weekly planning or basically partnering up maybe some senior members of our research group with junior members of our research group, this can actually assist in passing on positive qualities to the newer students coming in as well. This, as I've mentioned previously, is something that I've had a lot of issues with in terms of balancing guidance versus doing the work. And if I think back, there was one student in particular who was very passionate about the topic, very passionate about the study, but they had a lot going on. They were working at the same time as completing their masters, and time became something that was not easy to come by for the student. And what I noticed, every time they'd come to me close to the deadline, I need this analysis to be done, or I'm not sure how to perform this certain experiment. And instead of letting them go through the process of, learning and research, which is, you try something, it doesn't work, you try and figure out a way to amend that protocol, you try again, if that doesn't work, and you keep troubleshooting until it eventually does work. I would literally just give them the answer in terms of, okay, if you want this experiment to work, these are the specifics that you need to do. And what I noticed over the period of time is that, it was of no benefit to the student because, yes, they were able to get the outcome in terms of their result, but they were not learning these essential research skills as we were going along as well. So here, when it comes to balancing guidance versus doing the work, I think that, like we said, there's a balance that we need to find. If we are too involved in the student and, guide them on every single step of the way, it's going to stifle their learning. They're not going to pick up the skills needed in terms of troubleshooting, optimization, etc. And then obviously, at the other end of the spectrum, if we are not involved enough, this is going to risk derailment because the student feels like they have no guidance as well. You know, Something that one of my supervisors used to tell us is like, I'd let you guys struggle a bit before stepping in because it's in that struggle that you actually learn. So I think it's just going to depend on our specific supervision style as well. Another technique that we can use, instead of providing the student with the answer, maybe we can guide them to it. So instead of answering a question, maybe ask them guiding questions, and this can also assist in developing their own voice as a researcher and their own critical thinking skills as well. So at the end of the day, each of us, when we are supervising, student be it from honors, masters, or PhD, we want to develop or rather start developing independent researchers, students who can actually, go into a lab and, identify a protocol and troubleshoot it where needed to get their result, you know. Uh, so in that regard, how do we look at supervision? I feel that ultimately, it should build autonomy in your ability to research. It should foster critical judgment. It should basically highlight research ethics, and we do always instill, ethical research practices when it comes to our students. And obviously, interdisciplinary insight. The ability to maybe read widely, even across disciplines, because sometimes we'll notice when we are reading maybe a protocol from a completely different field, um, you know, we are able to make some adaptations to our own protocols. So the ability to even read widely, to critically analyze, to think logically, to troubleshoot, all of these are, key requirements in terms of us developing independent researchers as well. Okay, so we're not too far from the end. I'm not going to keep you too long, but I think that something that maybe many of us have had experience with would be conflict between supervisors and our students. This is a major challenge, and it could arise due to various reasons. Um, what we know is that avoidance, it's either one of two ways that it goes. You have an issue with your supervisor, or you have an issue rather with your student. How are you going to address this? So certain individuals would prefer to avoid the issue, and eventually the student will come around, or maybe other supervisors would like to rather escalate it to get it over and done with, at that period of time. So in that regard, the way in which we're approaching this sort of conflict is actually key. So one of the key issues with conflict is when our emotions actually become involved in this process, as they can often, cloud our judgment and lead to the situation actually being escalated more than what is necessary. So when we react emotionally, we focus on the facts or finding or rather, let me repeat that. When people react emotionally, focusing on the facts or finding a constructive solution can actually be difficult. If we take this back to our original point here, conflict between supervisors and our students, often we'll understand that there may be a disagreement between you and your student. If we are able to go and have, a conversation maybe at the end of the day, or pop an email, we'll notice that it leaves less time for these emotions to build, both within ourselves and our student, because we are addressing the situation. So when it comes to a conflict between supervisors and students, I believe that it's important for us to always address it fairly, unbiasedly, but address it as quickly as possible. This will prevent these emotions from building up in us, and allow us to actually focus on the fact, look logically at a problem and come up with solutions. So, when it comes to resolving the conflict, it requires recognizing and managing our emotions. And this is most of the time because at the end of the day, we all human. So this allows for a more rational and respectful conversation as well. By us as supervisors, being able to stay calm and empathetic, individuals can actually address the root cause of their conflict and work towards a solution that actually benefits everyone involved. No supervisor or student wants to be, in a relationship in terms of, supervisor student where there is some level of animosity that exists. It does not create an environment that is conducive to work. So as a supervisor, the onus, well, I believe personally, the onus is upon us to actually just, address these issues, nip them in the bud, and obviously have these mature conversations with our students, allowing the work to actually be the priority and not anything else. So, like I said at the beginning of the presentation, I just wanted to bring this to our attention. I don't want to speak too much to this, but I just maybe want to bring it to our attention in terms of the doctoral graduate attributes. And the reason I want to do this is because if we are lucky enough to supervise PhD students, these are some of the 9 attributes which have been highlighted by the Council for Higher Education that should be instilled in our students. So I'll quickly go through them. This is everything reading from, broad knowledge to specialized knowledge, insights into the related field, ethical awareness, original contribution, appropriate methodologies, reflection, and autonomy, something which is actually, I feel, is quite important, communication and digital literacy skills. And the most important one, in my opinion, would be critical thinking for problem solving. So now that we have an idea of these graduate attributes, I hope that as we hopefully progress to supervising more PhD students, that we can see if there's anything that's actually missing from what we currently do and work towards. Because at the end of the day, these attributes are only going to assist the students in being better researchers. And the last 2 slides that I have here focus on some supervision models. And I wanted to highlight this to us for the simple reason being there are frameworks out there, that we can align our supervision style to. There are frameworks that, will guide us in terms of, maybe we're unsure in terms of supervision. Maybe we're extremely new to it as well. So the first one I'll briefly go through will be the developmental model, and this was by Ger. The core idea here is that supervision is actually a developmental process that continually evolves over time and progresses from dependence to independence. And this is something that, I feel is quite important because when a student comes in at the start, maybe it's a new research area for them, they will be highly dependent on the supervisor in terms of guiding them through the ins and outs of the research area or the study. But as they begin to read more, as they begin to be in the lab more, collect more data, we see that they obviously their knowledge is starting to expand and they're going to start becoming more and more independent. And that's ultimately what we would want as a supervisor, to develop independent thinkers and critical thinkers as well. So they discuss the phases there, in where at the beginning it's going to be supervisor directed because the supervisor has the majority of the knowledge around the field. Thereafter, it'll shift to collaborative, and obviously towards the end would be student directed. And the only reason I say this is because I was listening to a talk recently by a professor from a university, I think it was in the UK, and they explained it quite nicely. They said, at the start of the project, you obviously have broad area knowledge, or we have broad area knowledge, but we only think about the student's project maybe a few hours every week. The student thinks of nothing else besides their project 24/7. So therefore, as we shift towards the end of the project, we'll know that the student has actually read so widely on their specific niche area that their knowledge can, it's increased exponentially. So essentially, with this model, we understand that learning is actually scaffolded by the supervisor. They provide the framework. The emphasis is on mutual, mutual learning. Reflective dialogue as well as a cultural context, and this encourages communities of practice and peer learning. What is the academic environment we want to stimulate for the future? And the last model we actually will speak on would be the social constructivist model. And the core idea here is learning is co-constructed through dialogue as well as social interaction between supervisor and our student. And this just speaks to the generations as well, the types of students, and obviously how the generations are moving forward. It emphasizes knowledge creation through supervisory conversation, scaffolding and communities of practice. And this strongly aligns actually with transformation agendas in South Africa, in the South African higher education, as well as indigenous knowledge systems. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for attending this session. I'd now hand over back to Mr. Nkosi, who would be able to field any questions or any points of discussion as well. So thank you, Mr. Nkosi. I'll stop sharing now.
Uh, Thank you so much, Dr. David, for that insightful presentation. I do hope and believe that colleagues do have questions. So let me just enable all your mics. Um, okay, yes, I have enabled all your mics, colleagues. If you do have a question or any contribution you want to make, kindly unmute your mic and ask your question or make your contribution. Or alternatively, just type under the chat any contribution or any question that you might have for Dr. Lorenzo David. Once again, thank you so much, Dr. Lorenzo. I see that there is a question from Dr. Abraham. In the core idea of supervision model, when and how can a supervisor decide that the student is capable of leading the research or being independent?
Okay, thank you, Dr. Abraham. I think maybe let me just maybe clarify this. When I say independent, I don't mean that the student just goes and does everything on their own. What I'm saying is that the student at that stage would, be in the lab and a particular, let's just say they don't get a particular result, or the result is not what is expected according to literature. They would thereafter be able to, without going to the supervisor and saying, what other experiment do you think I should try, or what do you think I should modify? The student at that point is actually able to go and research on their own, identify certain protocols, optimize the protocol, as well as carry it through. So that's what I mean in terms of being independent, because at the end of the day, the PhD student still will require guidance from us as a supervisor as well. But getting back to your question in terms of when and how a supervisor decides that the student is capable of leading the research or leading their own project, I think for me, it's always happened through when I had conversations with the students and when I was talking to them about their project, and they came up possibly with a solution that maybe had not been done in the research group before. So in terms of that, I think it's generally up to your interaction with the student and you gauging their depth of knowledge as well as their ability to everything from research, think critically, to implement, to make changes in the lab as well. So, Dr. Abraham, I hope that answers your question. It may not be too clear, but essentially what we're saying is that as the student progresses, if they are on track with their work, and we can see that through conversation, through their presentation, through their insights, that they actually are developing quite a deep understanding of the research area. At that point, I feel comfortable to allow the student a bit more leeway in terms of running with the project. But maybe there are some senior members that of staff that's actually present in today's session. So maybe if anyone else would like to jump in, please, and maybe provide some of your own maybe experience or insight of when you felt it was right. Like we always say, we always want to generate discussion and hear different perspectives. So thank you, Kosi. I'll hand over back to you.
Thank you, Dr. David, and thanks to Dr. Abraham. Just to add on to Dr. Abraham has asked earlier if the presentation and the recording will be shared. Yes, we do share the presentation and the recording. However, we share them via the model communities, which is the supervisor model community as well as the PDRF model community. If you are not enrolled in any of the communities, you are more than welcome to send us an email and then we will assist you. And now we are moving forward with the RCT management system, which is the platform that is very effective and convenient. So we kindly request you colleagues to register. You will find all the previous recording of all our workshops, as well as be able to book in time for all the upcoming workshops. So if you are not registered in any of those, please send us an email or arrange a meeting. We will be happy to assist you with that. I don't know if there is someone with a question. Colleagues, if you do have a question, just unmute your mic or alternatively just type under the chat before we can officially close or end the session. Okay, I see that there is no questions at the time. Okay. No, thank you so much, colleagues, and thank you to Dr. Lorenzo for taking your time once again in facilitating this kind of workshop. Just a quick reminder, we do have a workshop tomorrow in the morning on delving into the ethical implications of AI and emerging technologies in academic research. And that will be facilitated by Prof. Annie Vervoek. Please do register for that workshop. I will be sharing the registration link via the email. We kindly request you colleagues to register. Remember, if you do register for the workshop, that is where we get all your correct details in order for us to issue the certificate of attendance. Thank you once again for your attendance. I don't know if I'm closing anyone out who has a question or any contribution before I can officially end the session.
Can I just say something, please, Kosi? Just
Yes,
about
Doc, you can go ahead.
tomorrow's session. So tomorrow's session is actually, as Mr. Nkosi said, is going to be led by Professor Verhoef, and he's it's actually we're quite lucky to have Prof actually presenting at the session because Prof has actually formed an AI hub, shall we say, at NWU. So I think it's quite interesting for us to actually understand what are some of the things that's actually going on, what is some of the research actually pointing to in terms of AI, because as we move into the space, we interact more with students, we supervising more. I think our awareness around the topic of AI needs to actually improve because the students are well versed in AI. And I think we need to equally be aware of what is going on in the field, what are some of the ethical implications, what are the uses, etc. So it'll only add to us as being more effective supervisors as well. So that's it from me. But thank you all. Thank you all for attending, and I'll hand over back to Nkosi. Thank you, Nkosi.
Thank you, Dr. David, for taking our time and providing or facilitating this workshop for today. We really appreciate your time. And to the colleagues who have attended, thank you so much for always honoring our invite and always make sure that all our workshops are a success. We're looking forward to having you in tomorrow's session. I now officially end this session. Before I can end the session, colleagues, I've shared under the chat the feedback evaluation. I kindly request you to take your 3 minutes and fill that feedback in. It helps us in terms of examining ourselves and see the areas that we can improve on in order for us to make sure that we offer a better service, as well as to give feedback to our facilitators for taking their time. We usually share the feedback as well as the attendant register with our facilitators. So thank you so much. I hope to see you in tomorrow's session from 10 to 12 on AI. I now officially close the session. You can have a great day further. Thank you so much for your attendance. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.